Welcome to the Supplement Engineer Podcast. My name is Robert Chinetsky. Today, we have the pleasure of being joined by one of the true OGs of the supplement industry. He's a marketer, he's a formulator, whiz kid, former VP, Gaspari Nutrition, and the President of Spry Tribe, Mr. Daniel Pierce. Dan, thank you for joining us today, man. How are you?
I'm happy to be here, man.
I really appreciate it. We've had a few interactions over the past few years, but it's like this is one of those kind of interviews that I've been wanting to get off the ground forever, and it takes me to get the things in order. I'm glad you could make it. We're recording this on a Saturday afternoon, so awesome. Thank you for making time on the weekend away from family, friends, and all that other stuff. But yeah, let's dive right into it. Let's get your background. So people have heard of Gaspari. They know of all the other brands with whom you work these days. We won't get into too many specifics of that at this point, but let's get your background story of how you got into the supplement industry in the first place, because you've been around a long time, done a lot of cool things in the industry, but how did you even get here in the first place?
Yeah, I was actually a member of bodybuilding.com and the forums way back when they started, I believe, in the mid 2000s. Mm-hmm. And I built up a personality on there, created a blog on body space, and actually became, I guess, the most sought after reviewer by a lot of the larger brands. Mm-hmm. A lot of my reviews, what I would say, were more science based. It wasn't just, sensory input. It was literally kind of reviewing their formulas, then reviewing the research behind it, and just giving my honest opinion, whether good or bad. We didn't really realize it at the time, but those forums were extremely influential in the industry. So when I would give a bad review, it would actually start affecting revenue of brands in a very negative manner. For instance, one of them was Syntrax, who later sued bodybuilding.com. And we actually created a lot of, case law based off that. Mm-hmm. But then there would be positive reviews. And so that's how I sort of got a name in the industry. Mm-hmm. And then I think maybe one of the differences between myself and some of the other reviewers is I was actually a competitive bodybuilder. So I actually kind of looked the part too, which kind of set me apart. And then, truthfully, I wanted to get more involved in the industry. So I actually pitched two brands on how to, I guess, work the guerrilla marketing and digital marketing programs. And you have to remember, this was kind of, 2006, 2007, before, things like Instagram had really taken off, before YouTube had really taken off. Mm-hmm. TikTok didn't even exist. So back then it was a really big deal to really start controlling share of voice. And, mm-hmm. My educational background, since it was actually in computer science, we were actually able to apply some pretty advanced techniques, which truthfully I use today with a lot of the brands I work with as well.
That's what I was going to see is like, how did you even get in? Like, what was your background was in computer science and that? So that's.
Yeah. So truthfully, how I got involved, I guess, on the forums was actually being bored while working in grad school. Mm-hmm. I was a computer science major in undergrad, and then I went on to graduate school, and actually AI was actually my focus in graduate studies. But I spent a lot of time working in an overnight computer lab for students. So I had a lot of extra time on my hands, because there's not really too many, or I'd say, kids coming in and, working at 1 a.m. in the morning. And I worked graveyard shift. So that gave me a lot of extra time. And that's really, how I started to, I guess, get involved in just being obnoxious on bodybuilding.com, for better or for worse. And so like that. There really wasn't a crossover. It was really kind of just an interest in, supplementation. I was an athlete before college. In college, I got into bodybuilding. So a lot of that interest came as a result of just trying to better myself. But I realized I had a different perspective than a lot of consumers. And, there was a place to have a voice, which was bodybuilding.com.
Yeah. Fascinating. What do you think of the current state of the bodybuilding.com forums? Because that was kind of how I got my first little dabbling in there. Like you did, you started doing product reviews and you would meet interactions with some of the board reps, and then you become a brand rep on the forums. Then you meet the owners and it snowballs from there. But what do you think of, I guess, the downfall of the bodybuilding forums just in general? Because BB.com is gone, Anabolic Minds, not gone, but they're nowhere near what they were early, mid-2000s.
What sort of ruined it was a lot of litigation, truthfully. We had, there were quite a few lawsuits that actually stemmed from interactions of brands and debate on bodybuilding.com. I remember the good old days where, I would argue, for instance, with the owner of USP Labs, Jacob Geisler. I was one of the first people to actually call him out for mislabeling well before the feds caught up with him. And, it would get super heated, and it was very public. And, all of a sudden there would be phone calls, there would be lawyers involved, and it would get pretty bad. But I think a lot of it had to do with litigation. I mean, the unfortunate part was there was a lot of really good debate on there. I mean, we had, for instance, someone who I would have considered maybe a foe back then, but as things evolved, we became definitely have respect for each other and friendly, which is Patrick Arnold, right?
Yeah,
probably one of the most brilliant minds I would consider that ever existed in the supplement industry. And we would debate. You would have the guy who invented Superdrol, debating on the forums. We had, Bruce Neller, who brought Halodrol and a lot of other different compounds to market and great formulations, arguing on there. We had, Ron Kramer and I believe his name is Alex, who invented nitrates, on there debating. So it was a lot of really good active debate, which I think in today's sort of podcast, social media, like sort of ecosystem, you don't have a lot of active debate. We have a lot of active talking at audiences, but we don't have a lot of debate. And I think, it's something that's missing that I would like to see come back.
Agreed.
But
that's what I would like to lay a lot of this blame, even pretty much at like Facebook and Instagram, just the social media thing, because it's now before like the forums. It was great. You could have a long, lengthy, detailed discussion. It was respectful and it would get heated. But now it's where it's to the point where you go on Facebook or Instagram. I don't like what they said. I'm going to block them, or I'm just going to put this really, snarky, snippy,
I see that. Then you see the comments sort of go at it, and then people get tagged in, but it's really not. It's not how it used to be. And I think, I would blame litigation, but it's just the evolution of, I guess, social media itself, because the forum dynamic was what I would say a pretty primitive form of social media and a way to engage with people. Now it's much different. I think the other thing is bodybuilding.com's forums weren't run algorithmically like social media is. So social media, much different now. So how those debates, how you get in the algorithm, it is somewhat of a function of, how should I say, like the engagement on the post and stuff. But it's not like how forums operate. Yeah,
I miss those kind of days. And it seemed like there was a community. It was people policed each other instead of you had somebody like they had the mods there, which kind of ensured that there was no shenanigans or selfless, like shameless brand self-promotion and those kind of things. And the people that were on there that took the time, like, because you had to log in, then you had to put a post, then you had to like review it, then verify and do all this. Like there were a couple of layers here. And it seems like those kind of layers have been removed. And the easier access it is to publish something now, it seems like there's a concomitant decrease in the amount of intelligent responses in discourse and civil discourse that goes in there when you remove those barriers to entry. Yeah, no, it is. And I think part of, at bodybuilding.com, we would get pretty deep into the science, right? We would get, especially on the review side, it would go really deep. If you didn't have good substantiation, if you had gaps, if it really wasn't research based, people would really go at it and call you out on it. Yeah. Now in the supplement review world, it's really not. I like it's kind of embarrassing, and I'm probably going to piss some people off by saying this, but getting on Instagram or YouTube and tasting something and then saying how it's amazing something, like, to me, that's not a review, right? That's not really going into the science or whatever, and it's just not. Or I think the newest thing now is, and I'm walking a weird line here, but it's kind of like whoever has the highest dose and the most branded ingredients is now kind of what I would say talked about a lot in the supplement review world. And inherently there's gaps with that too, because just a bunch of branded ingredients in higher doses and higher doses and higher doses, it doesn't necessarily mean innovation or it's better. It just means a brand is willing to take less margin and probably lacks some other things on the marketing side. So I think, these days it's just it has gotten watered down a bit. And I think, if people were challenged more, we would probably
see, I think, people sharpening their pencils a little bit more before they start reviewing products, and hopefully the people actually watching this or watching them would have a higher standard for what a good review or a bad review is.
Yeah, and that's where I struggle with some things too, or just to understand the average consumers that are tuning into these supplement reviews. Because like you, I love to nerd out over the ingredients and get down into the science. And I mean, that's kind of one of the whole reasons I got into this industry in the first place. It's just a passion of wanting to understand how these little things tick these different receptors in our body and cause this cascade of different reactions and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start trying to distill all that down to the average consumer. And a lot of the time, like a significant purchasing proportion of the population, they just glaze over and they just say, does it taste like, and do I feel the tingles? And it just, at that point, it feels like you're beating your head against a brick wall to a certain extent. So it's trying to strike a balance. And it seems like the people that don't get into the science get more traction than the people that do get into the science.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think it is a very real thing. And I think I always say this, it's like when you're designing a product, it's like, what is your goal, right? I know for me, when I'm in 100% the driver's seat of a formulation, the goal is to have maximum impact, maximum benefit for the purchase, for the person that's purchasing the product, the consumer, right? Yep. That is a much different statement than saying, I'm going to make this to be the absolute best based off doses X, Y, and Z. And I think that's where part of the industry is going wrong. And I don't think that they even realize where they're going wrong with that. And it's created what I would call kind of the arms race when it comes to formulation, which is, again, higher doses, more branded ingredients. And, back in the day, when I was working with Bruce, we would actually build clinical trials around our products that were IRB reviewed, done by a separate CRO that we managed. And so we were actually trying to innovate, building things that would have maximum impact based off, actual endpoints like, increasing 1 rep max, increasing endurance, increasing, sensory stimulation, recall for, for things, I guess, that would increase brain output. And I think now it's just, we're relying too much on branded ingredient research, which truthfully has a ton of holes in it if you really read some of it. So I think, so this arms race right now, in my opinion, it is somewhat killing innovation. And it is, I don't think brands really understand, I would say the ones that participate in it, how much further they would get if they actually sort of step back and redesign the framework in which they formulate, right? But again, it's arm race. The people that are winning the arms race right now are the ingredient suppliers. Yeah,
I would agree with that 100%. I would say it's, 5-6 years ago, it was an arms race to just have the overall biggest scoop pre-workout. So then we used to the little micro dose, like 5 grams, like BPI 1 MR kind of, or C4, like little 5-7 gram scoops. Then somebody came out with a 15 gram scoop, then 20 gram scoop. And then that kind of leveled off at about 20 grams. And then there was the arms race for caffeine where we went 300, 350, 400, 600, 700 in a scoop. And now it's the citrulline arms race is the current flavor of the month. And there was a study I was reviewing yesterday that I sent out in my little weekly newsletter blast about 10 grams of citrulline that they tested in 67-year-olds that were obese. And I thought, all right, well, this is just going to add more fuel to the fire for saying we need to have 10 grams of citrulline as the de facto. This is the only effective dose. And it's just, that's not the truth. It's just
it's not. And you see, like, there's some studies that are a little bit higher than that. And it actually shows it has diminishing returns.
Right.
I think, that's where, like, I think sometimes the science is just ignored, or it's just not even known. I know my process now, my process back in the day, it was really data driven, right? Understanding what people really want, and then trying to align ingredients, that would sort of fit that mold. And I think, for instance, I believe Super Pump Max was one of the first brands to sort of inversely show, like, against USP Labs, Jacked, and a few others, like, here you have this little scoop versus a big scoop. And like, we kind of created that, like, that dilemma, so to speak, because they went after us and basically said, you have this scoop full of a lot of dog shit, and then we have this little thing and ours feels better. And truthfully, they won that race, and that's why we evolved in the Super Pump Max. But when we did that, we made it a point to create something that had, that we knew would show great results when we ran clinical trials on it, which we did. But we also introduced a lot of innovation to do that. And I think it's a little bit harder these days, but that product, I believe, introduced 8 new ingredients to sports nutrition. Right? It introduced glycerol phosphates. It introduced actually pure citrulline. It introduced glutathione. It introduced ornithine aspartate and a bunch of others. And I think, these days, instead of trying to innovate, a lot of formulators just get caught up in trying to up their competition. And as opposed to really resetting and thinking like, okay, like, will someone get a great effect from this? What do I need to achieve that? And then how am I going to differentiate based off my formula and not necessarily like a dose level? And when I say by a formula, like what endpoints am I moving, right?
Yeah.
Will this actually increase strength over the basic ingredients? Will this actually increase endurance or whatever else? And I think that's what's really missing. And the reason why it's missing is because brands have gotten caught up in this arms race of more doses. They actually can't afford clinical research anymore. And they're outsourcing it to the branded ingredient suppliers who then sell those same ingredients to all their competitors using the same science. Yeah. So it's quite the dilemma these days. And I'm not sure if a lot of brands are really waking up to that.
At least in the sports nutrition niche, like subset of the overall supplement industry, I don't think so yet. I mean, it seems like you've mentioned a couple of times, it's the also ran thing. We're going to copycat, or I see this brand's going to put 3 grams of tyrosine in. I'm going to put in 5 grams plus 8 grams of citrulline. So I'm going to have a bigger scoop. I'm going to put in 3 branded ingredients alongside of it. And yeah, sure, you're a formulator. You've put together a thing because you've taken somebody's formula, you've upped their dosages and added 1 or 2 ingredients. That doesn't mean anything. Do you actually understand at like the physiological cellular level what's going on with all of this stuff in the body? And it's just there's a succinct lack of that just across like
there is. I mean, one of my hallmarks in formulation, like when I'm actually involved in something, is trying to introduce some sort of new ingredient every time I'm part of a formulation team, right? And it's not easy, but it can be done. But it does take actually researching it. Sometimes it requires you creating an ingredient or repurposing ingredient from major food and putting it back, into like a sports nutrition supplement. So like these days, for instance, Glycer Pump is all the rage, right? And the sort of previous version of that was Hydromax. But Hydromax really wasn't stable. I actually was the one who actually introduced those researchers to Glanbia to, I guess, brand Hydromax and bring it to market. But at the same time, I didn't necessarily like the science of Hydromax because, if you read the glycerol studies, okay, it actually takes a lot of glycerol to elicit hyperhydration in certain,
I've remarked on that several times. Every time there's a new
I also didn't necessarily like the amount of silica that's in it because silica kind of, in my opinion, is not really good for hydration. Okay, especially when using gram doses. And this is another thing that may get me in trouble. Is it pretty much most brands using that much silica are actually, how should I say, going against FDA regulations that actually state how much silica you can have in a food product. But that's a whole other debate. So at the same time that was going on, I said, well, look, can we do something better? So we had something called Glycerol Triacetate, which is called triacetin. And it's basically glycerol molecule attached to 3 acetate molecules. And it has the effects of glycerol with some buffering. And we basically used certain forms of cyclic dextrins. And we were able to make a powder form of it. And we introduced it in a product called Superdrive. So what we were able to do is not use silica. We were able to introduce a powdered form of glycerol in a product that had some buffering effect, and it was actually innovative. If you look up triacetin, it is widely used. Okay, it's just not used in our world. And I believe Coke has a patent on it, so be careful with the dose amount. But that was innovation, right? We tried. Truthfully, it was not really stable in powder after a few months, and completely messed up a product. But at the end of the day, we tried, right? We tried to be innovative, and it was actually based off of sound research fundamentals as opposed to, just copying the next guy. And, I think that's, again, I don't see a lot of trying when it comes to that these days. And it's, as I said, like it can be done, right? Even formulation projects that I've been involved in the last few years, we're still able to introduce new ingredients. It just, I think there has to be a shift in mindset and saying like, look, no offense to Compound Solutions, I know Matt Titlow very well, but you're selling your ingredients to all of my competitors, right? Yeah. Like, so I have to sort of take a step back and say, okay, what else is there? Who are the guys not selling to all my suppliers or all my competitors? And I think, I just don't see a lot of that. I think some formulators these days, because they have that relationship, they think that that's their conduit to innovation. When truthfully, the conduits of innovation, for instance, PubMed and NIH, it actually has an open API for its research. So if you know how to bring in big data and manipulate it and start aligning it with, like, for instance, things that have high share of voice on Google, YouTube, or Amazon, and you start aligning those like studied endpoints with certain like natural language processing methods, you can start fusing things together and find innovation.
Cool.
That is something, though, that none of these ingredient suppliers are doing. Truthfully, most brands don't even do, right? But that's where you really start combining technology with existing databases. Yeah. I don't have to go to these ingredient suppliers that are talking to all my competitors. So, so that's how, truthfully, I started infusing what I would say big data computer science methods with research and trying to, basically digest things down to find, potential ingredients that are innovative.
Fascinating. Okay, so you were doing this when you were on the bb.com forums, and then did you transition from that to Gaspari?
I was doing this at Gaspari Nutrition. At Gaspari Nutrition, and I can talk about this now. Some of the secret sauce that we had back then was, we had very powerful social listening tools, right, that we developed in-house that have since been, a lot of companies come out with them, like Sprout Social or Radian 6 or these other big listening tools. Yeah. But we had those listening tools, and we basically monitored everything online. We also use I also use some of those tools to pull in big data. So, for instance, ornithine aspartate, right? Like, it would be very hard to find. Okay, if you were it was basically used for people that had encephalitis, and it was studied as a drug in Japan, right? And so I was trying to find something that would help lower ammonia, because ammonia builds up while you're working out and doing anaerobic workouts. And, so started plugging in certain parameters and started looking at, things that would amino acids that would help augment or lower ammonia during exercise. Okay. There was a miss there, right? Because it wasn't studied for endurance at the time. But then I'm like, okay, what are disease states that have higher ammonia? Okay. Encephalitis was one of them. Okay. And then that's how I was able to actually find that in the Japanese research. And then we put it in a Super Pump Max.
Yeah, see, shit like that. Yeah. I can think of maybe one or two other people that may do something along those lines. Yeah. But
it's great because we preceded the actual research in athletes. I think there have been ornithine aspartate studies since, but we were 5 years ahead. Yeah. Right. So, for instance, the glutathione citrulline combination that Kyoto Haku patented, right? We use that combination in Super Pump Max before they did their clinical. That product actually influenced their clinical, then influenced their patent, essentially, that they're selling to everybody now. So I think, there are advanced methods. It's just, I think, look, anyone that's ever had a successful formulation or worked for a successful brand has a big ego, right? Like, if you read some of my old posts on bodybuilding.com, you're like, wow, what an asshole, right? We went on to win a lot of bodybuilding.com awards, GNC awards with Popeyes. I mean, every possible supplement award that you could possibly get for a formulation, I've actually achieved, right? But at some point, you have to sort of step back and take the ego out of it and say, man, I have to sort of get out of this sphere of influence, because the network effects like can just influence you the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right. In thinking what's innovative and what's popular, this and that. And when you remove yourself from that, you actually start digging into real data. That's when you can really have some true innovation. And that's where things like, cyclic dextrin, came into play, right? Again, that was another, what I would say, data mining gold mine, so as a formulator, I was the first to introduce it in formulation in North America, and that's where Glycofuse came out, right? But again, that was mining Japanese research at the time using some of the same methods I just talked about. And so a lot of great things came from that, and I think that's why I think over time I've been able to have a lot of firsts, when it comes to ingredient combinations or just ingredients themselves.
Let's get a little bit of an inside look at the glory days of Gaspari, if you don't mind going into that. What was the interactions between you, Bruce, and Rich? Did Rich just kind of say, hey guys, y'all go be kids in the candy store, whatever you want to do? And did he kind of give the carte blanche for the formulations? Because he's like the name face and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, the great thing about Rich is he let us do what we wanted, and that was what I think part of the success. He was a smart enough CEO at the time to let these like eggheads, as he used to call us, like go ham, present a concept, a formulation concept, but also a story, right? Like the story behind the product, I think, is so important of why we're developing it and what we're trying to accomplish. And we would present, the clinical budget, was it patentable or not? And he would be like, cool, let's put it in a presentation and see if GNC or Vitamin Shop wants it, or bodybuilding.com. So that's how, and he would let me present to the retailers. So I was usually point man on selling some of this stuff in, which was awesome, because we would blow them away, right, with the research and what we were trying to do. But I think, I guess the relationship of Bruce and I is, Bruce was the reason why I got involved in Gaspari Nutrition, because of this relationship that we had developed on the forums, right? And Bruce, brilliant guy, right? And he went away for a little bit because he was a little too smart for his own good, and so I helped him with a lot of his research while he was on the inside. We had co-authored a few patents. But at the same time, I brought a concept to him and I said, hey, man, I think this would be really cool for a fat burner if we use these certain thyroidal components, combine it with a new ingredient at the time, which was called glucoxanthin, which could serve as a brown adipose tissue coupler, and add some stimulants. I think we can develop a really cool fat burner. And he's like, cool, put it together. So that was my first formulation, was just like, cool, put it together.
So you brought fucoxanthin to market too?
Yes, we were the first in sports.
Yeah, damn, that's one of the ingredients I start to use in a couple of different fat burners I've used these days, and I never knew where it actually originated from. I've seen it in a couple of different products and gone down a research rabbit hole. We were the first in
sports nutrition, and then like right around the same time we did it, another brand, like not a sports nutrition brand, they launched it in Vitamin Shop as well. But they launched it as a single overpriced ingredient. And we had it in this huge, this huge like monster fat burning formula. Yeah. So I think, Bruce is the one who, how should I say, basically vouched for me with Rich and said, this guy really knows his shit. And, so that's how I got my foot in the door in terms of the formulation side, because I was there on the digital marketing side, but there was another, how should I say, bag of tricks. And so that was mitotropin was my first formulation. Again, we introduced a lot of ingredients at the time. I think, we introduced 3,5 and 3,3 prime diethylthyronines, again, which at the time had never even been researched in humans. And those are like what I would say the third and fourth order downstream metabolites of
the thyroid hormones.
Yeah. So we used a lot of cool science, and that's kind of how it went. Truthfully, we were also looking at what I would say next generation hormones. I think what differentiated, Rich obviously got his start because of the what I would say the pro-steroid and hormone era. But what he did right was actually clinically studying some of them. For instance, Novadex and ATD. We also had I forget the name of the compound. It was I forget what it was. But we did small pilot studies, and then we also licensed 6-OXO from Patrick Arnold, who also had conducted clinical trials. So we were looking at next generation things, and this could probably be like maybe a discussion for another podcast, is the hormones that were developed that never made it actually to market, because we had things that what I would say we would consider DSHEA compliant. We had arguments for that, would probably really kick ass, would have kicked ass, but would kick ass even nowadays, and we had a pretty cool process. I think truthfully, where some things went sideways at Gaspari Nutrition is we grew way too fast. We went from sub 10 million to over 80 million in revenue in less than 4 years. Went from a handful of countries to over 115 countries. And, if you know anything about the regulatory side of the business, especially international regulatory, it can really chew things up. Yeah. So it grew too fast. Egos grew too fast. Contracts grew too fast, and it sucks how things ended up, because, I would say Bruce and I, we sort of had a bad breakup. But now that I look back on it, it wasn't his fault, kind of wasn't my fault. It was kind of just, we were kind of in a turbulent brand that was just going off the tracks at 100 miles an hour. Yeah. So
fascinating. With so obviously you're in this stage of formulation. You're the Compound Solutions, New Live, Nutrition 21, all these big ingredient houses that are bringing ingredients to market now. They weren't as common, ubiquitous as they are. It seems like every other week we're getting some new branded ingredient on the market, and which there's attached a small little pilot study. Two things I'd like to get your insight on are, what goes into actually getting one of these pilot trials off the ground and working with a CRO? And then second, what is the burden of proof you need to see before you even consider an ingredient going into a formula? Let's say it doesn't have much human data. So turkesterone is the hot little trick right now in the industry, and everybody and their grandma is coming out with a turkesterone supplement in some shape, form, or other. So would that pass the Daniel Pierce barrier to entry for inclusion in a pre-workout, or not pre-workout, supplement?
So there were different phases of Gaspari Nutrition. I would say the pre-GMP and then the GMP, version. And between those times, there were what I would say different levels of liability and exposure. So, turkesterone, ironically, you guys bring it up, or you brought it up. It was actually in Super Pump 250, allegedly, right? And then we got called out because the person testing it couldn't actually find it in the formula. And they had the only analytical standard for it that existed in the world. They actually had developed it. So what I would say pre-GMP, it was kind of like the wild, wild west. Like, could you develop a DSHEA argument and basically say this existed in nature in this certain amount that could be found in the food supply? Yeah. If it could, it would go in a formula. And it was the wild, wild west. You had compounds that, this wasn't just necessarily Gaspari Nutrition, but would appear in, I don't know if you ever heard of Vita's Anabolic and Androgens. It's probably one of the most influential books in sports nutrition that no one really knows about. And, guys would find something that had a good anabolic to androgenic ratio. Can we have it synthesized? Let's try it. And that's where Superdrol came about. That's where, what I would say, I can't even remember some of the names, but that's where that came about. Now, was that tested in human clinical trials before it came out? Actually, in the form of dimethazine, it was, right? But that's a completely different compound. It's two superdrols connected by an azine compound basically bond in the middle. But yeah, I mean, there really wasn't one. Okay, where we would so as we start to go into the GMP era, where you're held accountable for testing and quality assurance, that's where I would say the DeShea arguments had to become more bulletproof. Okay, because there was actually, how should I say, references. Okay, for what that would mean. The FDA would start getting more clear and clearer and clearer with their perspective of things. So as that did, we would start to level up. We would look at certain compounds if they had clinical research, if they had, for instance, if like where was the LD50 in certain species, would that carry over into humans, and what those calculations were. So actually a lot went into it. And then we would sort of, what endpoints do we want to move? And then we would do a 5 to 10 person quickie, pilot study using a CRO that, again, with accredited MDs, physicians, sports nutritionists, and just vetted researchers. Right. So it that was sort of what I would say post GMP Gaspari Nutrition, and it was a much different, I guess, level of discernment that we would give them.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things, while we're on the topic of the CROs, and for the listeners that may not have idea what we're talking about, contracted research organization, is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So basically a lab that you can go and you contract them, and will do the exercise trial or cognitive tests on whatever ingredient you're wanting to test. Couple of things I want to get into on that front. What's a rough cost for that, first of all, and then we can jump off from there.
Well,
for one of those trials.
Costs always come from the number of endpoints that you want to study. One that I've worked with recently is the Human Performance Lab at Rutgers on some IP that I've been developing. And, looking at very specific endpoints, it could cost anywhere from, let's say, $9,000 to $15,000 for something that's very small and doesn't have a lot of endpoints. But you can't skip IRB review, like approval, which is an actual sanctioning body will actually review the construct of the study before it's even allowed to be done at a university. Yeah. Okay. And, not all CROs are affiliated with universities, so to speak. But most universities, I should say not most universities, but many universities have a human performance research laboratory that you could do these things at. Baylor University is one that comes to mind. Rutgers University is another one that comes to mind. I believe Ohio State has one.
Yeah, I think Arkansas and UNC do as well.
Yeah. So there's ways. There's plenty of ways to do it for sure.
Yeah. With that, a common complaint that comes out either from researchers, people that just enjoy supplements and that are skeptical of supplements in general, they'll look at a study and they say, "Oh, well, this was funded by a supplement company, or this was funded by the ingredient house." They say, therefore, we can't trust this study. At the same time, I understand that to a certain extent, but the money and the materials have to come from somewhere. The FDA, the NIH aren't handing out 6-figure grants for people to go test and see how much creatine nitrate they can take to increase their bench press or their hypertrophy results or something. So how do we communicate that to the consumers, or just as a brand say, hey, the money's got to come from somewhere?
I think I think you have to take a step back and not necessarily see who's funding it, but actually look at the construct of the study and seeing what are they actually measuring, right? There's some branded ingredients that I'll leave nameless now.
Come on, name them.
But you look at the endpoints that they're measuring, and it's a 500% increase in nitric oxide, output. And it's but when you actually look at would that have a physiological effect? It won't, right? Sure. Then you look at the nitrate studies, and the results are off the charts. A lot of it was funded by the owners or associated brands, and it's you can't question it. And then the efficacy of the ingredients themselves, just the sensory effect when you get them, they're amazing. I used to be one of the biggest, how should I say, critics of nitrates when they first came out, because they didn't necessarily have the level of research they have now, right? Yeah. And I was wrong, right? And then as that started coming out, I was like, fuck, man, this shit really works. And yeah, who cares if, Cellucor funded one of the studies or this other brand funded it? It works. It's legit. It's done in a legit research lab. It's done with legit researchers. So I think where customers have to, I don't know, they have to be able to maybe read a study before they can really judge a study. And I see the same thing with QA and lab testing, right? And I'm not going to name brands, but I've actually seen brands have their influencers put out like certificates of analysis that show that the compound or the product didn't meet label claim, right? It's off by a gram or some milligrams, and they're actually saying, "See, we meet label claim," and customers can't even read it themselves and realize that person's full of shit. And they don't even know that they're full of shit.
Yeah, they just gobble it up.
I've seen the same thing with some of the loudest brands about quality control put out, certificates of analysis on their protein, and it was actually off a few grams, and it's a supplement facts panel, so it actually has to meet or exceed label claim, right. And they actually got a one of these review sites a certification for it, and I was like, holy shit, no one's catching this. And so I think people have to be humble and sort of say, okay, maybe I don't know everything. I need to learn a little bit, and maybe some of the brands I'm learning from maybe aren't. I'll say this: the brands with the best quality assurance in the industry don't talk about it. Why? Because it's just something they do. It's just their standard, right? Some of the loudest brands about quality control and testing have a lot of flaws. No, I'll leave it at that.
Good to know. Good to know. On the topic of
podcast, by the way, if you want to
say it again,
it could be a whole other podcast.
This might be the first in a series of interviews with you.
Well, here's a prime example, right? And I will name a brand, all right? And I'm not trying to pick on them. It's just an observation, right? I saw a retailer, okay, put up a supplement facts panel. This was actually Natural Body, right? Great guys. Put up a supplement facts panel for like a pro, okay? And I was reading it, and I'm like, that supplement facts panel has a lot of errors, right? They're calling certain amino acids essential amino acids when they weren't. Some declarations were off, and so when you're actually trained in like label law, okay, which I am on the nutrition side and the supplement side, and you start to see that, right? And it incenses you because you realize none of these people that are putting themselves out as supplement experts in this field, don't notice it, but it's right there if you actually know the regulations. Yeah. And I see a lot of that. I mean, I'm usually every once in a while, I'll just come in and like snipe and be like, yeah, there's this error here. And then I just sort of vaporize because I don't want to like get in trouble. But I see it all the time, right? I mean, we'll take it a step further and a brand that claims to have some of the best quality control out there launched a product and the ingredient had not been certified kosher yet, the main ingredient, but they put it out as kosher, right? Just because they didn't do their due diligence. The same brand also makes a lot of non-GMO claims and nothing has ever been verified, okay? And, but again, you don't know that unless you really know the ingredients, really know the suppliers, and really know how QA works.
Right.
So I see a lot of this. I'm usually quiet about it, but it's out there. And that's why I say like the brands with the best quality control out there, they just don't talk about it, right?
Right.
Brands made at SQF level, 2 manufacturers. Most of the people watching this have no idea what level of quality, control or assurance that is. And it's insane, right? And you never hear it talked about.
And I think that carries over to a lot of other aspects of just the supplement industry and just humanity in general. It's like people that are actually doing some cool shit with formulas, you don't hear them going out saying, I'm a game-changing formulator, I'm a titan of industry, I'm an innovator. And they're in their little cubbyhole lab thing, doing their shit, letting the product speak for themselves or something like that, and like letting other people just talk about the formulas and what's in it. If you have to go out and scream that you are XYZ, chances are you aren't even one iota of what you're claiming to be
I agree. I agree. I think the smartest brands these days realize that to have a good brand, it goes beyond just the supplement.
Yeah.
You have to have a culture. You have to have a content system that draws people to that supplement and keeps them with it. So it could be training programs, an app, and any number of things, right? And those are the guys that really, you don't hear them talking about quality control, even though they have some of the best, because I'm an insider on some of those brands.
Right.
But they focus on the positive, right? And some of these other brands that don't get it, right? Like I've been in those like meetings, right? I'm just like, look, it's not just about the formula, right? It's not just about how much shit is in here. It's the impact you're making to your community, to everyone else. Are they getting the results? Do they feel cool taking it? Do they want to wear your t-shirt because they're so fucking proud of this powder? They're going to wear your t-shirt, use your workout program, and do all this other shit. And just some people don't get it because they're just like, but my formula. It's like, dude, there's more to it than that.
Agreed. You could have the best formula on the planet, but if nobody's buying it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Back up to the nitrates for a second. You said you were a fan of them, and I think most of the people that would listen to this program have used them in some supplement or other. Do you think there's much of a difference to date? More of the research on the benefits of nitrates in regards to exercise performance are done with either beetroot juice or just giving them and then there's a few on the amino bound nitrates, and those studies seem a little bit more mixed than the beetroot juice studies themselves are. Do you think there's much of a difference between natural sources of the dietary nitrates versus the amino-bound nitrates in terms of the real-world effects and results that you get from them?
I think when it comes to nitrates, there are differences between the amino acid versus the beetroot sourced ones, right? The beetroot created ones, so to speak, like they exist within an extract that has a lot of other things besides nitrates. That has a lot of polyphenols, antioxidants, a lot of other ingredients. So how it affects your system works a lot differently than the amino-bound ones. Right. The amino-bound ones also tend to be in these beefed up formulas with a lot of other ingredients that, again, unless you're really doing an endpoint study on that like multi-ingredient product with nitrates, it's really hard to say how beneficial X, Y, and Z is to be, and to just isolate the nitrates, for instance, their effects. So a lot of the beetroot studies are done on just beetroot juice. So it doesn't have all these other ingredients, which may counter effect the beneficial effect of the nitrate. They actually may enhance it. And that's where I think that's where some of the differences may lie, if that helps shed some light on it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Just because from the listeners that may not understand, like the polyphenols and all the other stuff and that can activate some of the nitric oxide synthase enzymes that catalyze the production of it, and it could increase the bioavailability and longevity of it in the bloodstream and
exactly. I legitimately think that the beetroot, like regular beetroot based products that are standardized for nitrates, they might have an easier way of getting in the system and being processed by the system. And I think the other thing that I guess sort of a gap in formulation that I see is, we don't take into account redox state of highly trained athletes, right? So if you're continuously training, your redox state is going to be much different than a normal person, right? And I do believe beetroot extracts are going to have an easier time, shifting that balance to a positive redox state, or I should say a low redox state in active athletes, just for the mere benefit. It doesn't have all these other things working in tandem with it or maybe against it. And that's where sometimes I think, I love nitrates, amino acid nitrates. I mean, again, I was the biggest critic. They're awesome. What Ron and Alex did is amazing. And I'm happy to recommend it in a lot of formulations, right?
Yeah.
However, I also think that, and just in general with some formulations, people aren't really thinking through all the receptor and I guess the nutritional biochem of the formula to really say, is anything interacting with things in here, right? Like one of the simplest manipulations that you could do with a formula, right? Like we see BioPerine used a lot, and now I think it's like estrogen and some of those other ingredients, right?
Yeah.
Like if you just use creatine as an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the easiest ways to help bioavailability of creatine is just add some table salt to it.
Yeah.
Right? Like stupid shit like that. People aren't thinking through those things. And so now we just see BioPerine and everything, or estrogen and everything, or this and everything, and that and everything. And it's like, guys, like, there's a lot of shit in there. Like, is it really going to have that additive effect? I think sometimes it's going to be counteractive.
Correct. Yeah. In the podcast we were doing earlier, the Final Scoop episode we were doing earlier today, we got on the subject of kitchen sink formulas, and I feel like your comment right there kind of feeds into that. Is like a lot of brands these days just grab a handful of ingredients, throw it against the wall, let's see what sticks. I'm just going to shovel that into the product, and it's like you got to peel back the layers and kind of understand where are these things different hitting on the points.
Totally, because like there's something I've talked about among my friends. I'll talk about now, like the art of formulation, right? The art of formulation is, in my opinion, is having something that moves endpoints like strength, endurance, okay, in a measured manner, better than the single ingredients themselves. Something that is scalable, meaning I can take this from 1,000 units to 100,000 units and produce it, okay? The other aspect is, can I make it taste great? Not good, great. Okay, that's hard. And then, will it last for 2 or 3 years on a shelf and not turn into a clump of shit? Right. So and then the final part is, can I build a story around it? Right. That's the art of formulation. I think where a lot of formulators go these days is, does it look good on paper? Right. And some of these other things suffer. Right. So if you have the harmony of all those elements that I just mentioned, that's what makes a great formula, in my opinion. So it may not necessarily have the biggest scoop. It may not just taste like perfect candy, although I think everything should. It may not be popular on some of these supplement review sites, but at the end of the day, am I reaching hundreds of thousands of people with it?
Right.
Does it taste good? Is it a great formula? Is it stable over time? And does it actually have an impact? I think that's where I think the art of formulation sometimes gets lost. You know, and
yeah, and I mean that's something I'm guilty of too. And so like just when we're discussing formulas on the thing, I don't know the whole story of, like, I don't know what their target consumer is. I don't know the brand owners, what their mission statement is. When I'm sitting on the podcast and somebody says, well, what do you think of this formula? The only thing I can really go on is, because I don't have all that background information, is I can say, this is dosed well based on the studies. This isn't dosed well. I don't understand why this is in here, but this is just my one-sided view of everything. I don't have all the other factors. Maybe their customers really like feeling that thermogenic effect in their pre-workout, so they're going to put a little GBB or paradoxine or calorburn or something like that in there. And that's fine. Those are the caveats you got to put in there. And so we got to remember there's a lot more that goes into it than just the label that we see sometimes when we're reviewing something.
Exactly. It's like, what is the experience of the target customer, right? It's going to be different for a lot of different brands. I know for me, even though I've diversified my business and I'm doing like what I would call big data advertising marketing, I think just my market share in Amazon is around 125 million right now, right? In terms of brands, in terms of total brand reach. And this is not just sports nutrition. Sports nutrition is a small part of it. It's actually closer to, I think, 275 million globally and over 150,000 storefronts, right? So when you look at things from that perspective and saying the things that I'm influencing are reaching that many people, it really starts to reset like the perspective in saying, like, is something good or not, right? Yeah. I think this leads into my next thing now that you gave me a soapbox, is like, what's up with these fucking supplement awards? Like, there's a new one like every week. I'm kind of sitting back, right? Because like, look, it's hard not to be a snob, right? Because it's like, all right, fuck, man, I've won like brand of the year at GNC, or product of the year, or been written about in Nutrition Business Journal, and you get like accolades from them or this or that. Like, you've been asked to speak at conferences. Then I'm watching like, all right, this brand just won a supplement award by who? And it's not to be a dick. It's just like, man, like I'm embarrassed for some of the brands accepting these things the way that they are. Okay. Because it's like, it's just who's giving the award?
Yeah.
Like I'll give it. Stacked awards actually mean something. Shane, what he's built, every brand in the industry respects that site and wants visibility on it. Yep. But some of the up and comers, I'm just like, who are you, man? You're just someone that, I mean, look, maybe I'm just being a dick right now, but it is something that I will say that I do talk about with clients, and we're just like wondering, like, where do these awards come from? Right? Like you should come up with an award, like, I mean, I
get my logo embossed on the tub,
like, and I think in my opinion, that is somewhat watering down our industry and hurting it, in my opinion, because it's just what's happening now is like whoever is paying for the content on those sites is who's winning the awards, right? And
100%.
And the brand's sort of playing to that and kowtowing that. Like people see that. People aren't stupid.
No, I don't think so either. And I guess it's kind of like I would liken it to the amount of TV shows and crap that is put out on all the different streaming services. So back, even as far back as, not even as far back, 5 to 10 years ago, there was still quality stuff coming out because there wasn't as much available. But now we've got so many review sites, so many authorities on supplements. Just like we have 15 million goddamn streaming services, you're getting a brand new show every week. When you're pumping out that much volume, quality is definitely taking a tremendous hit. And the same thing, we have so many companies, because there's such a low barrier to entry in the supplement industry. Yep. You're getting all of these copycat formulas and then more watered down stuff. And the same thing's happening with supplement awards. Every YouTuber is coming out with one. Every other e-retailer is coming out with one, and they don't mean shit.
Well, that's the thing. That's where I think I would like to see a little bit of debate injected into the industry. I saw, I'll leave names out of this, but I saw a review site actually get called out by the president of a brand and said, hey, you have a problem with our formula. You have a problem with how we do business. Why don't you come on our podcast and let's actually discuss it and debate it? And the review site backed down. And I'm thinking like, man, like if you really stood by your position on why you hate this brand or why you always make fun of them or always talk shit about it, why wouldn't you want to go on there and actually blast them?
Right.
I mean, and I think it's just because they don't, because they're so used to just talking out and not getting called on their bullshit. Yeah. And I really wish, I mean, look, I understand it. Like it's not a good thing to be negative. And take it from me, who's actually been in a few lawsuits over this. You have to choose your words wisely. But at the same time, I do think that there should be more debate in the industry, especially about awards, who's calling out who, ethics in the industry. I mean, the ethical arguments that I see right now, I think they're pretty fucking weak, right? There are some pretty big fish to fry when it comes to ethics in the industry. And we're worried about, does a brand's brand name look similar to something else that's trademarked, right? Like we're calling out ethics on that, or we're calling out ethics on doses, right? And that's where I think there needs to be more challenging, because like for someone like me, right, I spend about $20,000 to $25,000 a year, embarrassingly, on trying everyone's products, right? Yeah. Not just in sports nutrition, but food, whatever else, right? Mm-hmm. So like, I want to understand deeper why maybe they did that, or just the feeling and the effect, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where I think sometimes the arms race and how sometimes in this review sort of ecosystem, how it's hurting things, because it's training people just to look at things and be like, well, if it's not higher, then it's not that good, right? When the reality is when you sort of start chasing that, you can't afford innovation. So it's like, what's the balance? So
yeah, and that's a question I've gotten on from time to time. I'm curious to get your insight, since you've formulated for a number of brands over the years. When you're approached by a company that says, hey, I want to do any kind of formula, what is your initial mindset? Do you kind of say, hey, this is my moonshot formula, and then you whittle away from here? Or do you have an initial discussion with the brand saying, all right, they give you the price point and they say, formulate to this roof? Or like what angle do you attack when you're creating a formula?
Usually it's no, right? I'll be honest. I turn down a lot of brands these days just because, how I've shifted my business. I have to, like, what's the likelihood of future success, right?
Yeah.
And, so I truthfully, I don't want to waste my time on a startup these days, unless they have some real innovation and some real financial backing.
Yeah.
Right. But I think if I do come, if a brand does approach me, and a lot of times it may come from I'm running advertising for them or running something and they want input, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times I don't start with a formulation approach. I come up with a data approach of like, how are we going to create a framework of, that captures the data that we're looking at that could benefit and be sticky with your target audience, right? And that's where it is a much different approach than to instead of saying, wow, okay, Dynamine's popular now, we need that,
right?
Or dicaffeine malate is popular now, we have to have that in there, or glycer pumps in it, we have to have that in there, right? It's a much different data driven approach, and it really depends on where they want to sell. Amazon's ecosystem is much different than GNC, which is different than Vitamin Shop, which is different than the D2C Wild West and the brick and mortar mom and pops. So, but I'll say this, usually the answer is no. If I just get approached, just because, where my business is at, like I really have to look at the potential of the brand. And, what's the longevity, because look, I see it, and I've learned from mistakes, right? Because I have created great formulas for brands that didn't last, and I just wasted a lot of good potential IP on something that didn't go anywhere.
Right. Yeah. What's day-to-day work look like for you these days? If you're not doing as much in the formulation realm, you're doing more IT, marketing, kind of SEO stuff in that range.
It's data driven marketing, advertising, and research. Truthfully. So day to day, I usually get up pretty early. I go work out before I do anything. Come home, eat, take the kids to school, and come home. And then I have a meeting with my staff. Truthfully, my staff is all over the world. Okay. But we have a set meeting time every day, and review campaigns, review workloads, project plans, whatever. Then I have what I would call like kind of my review time. And I have a lot of different dashboards set up for different things. A lot of just what I would say listening tools and big data tools to help me make decisions with what I do. Okay. Because I'm spending millions of dollars a month now in advertising. Okay. But I think what makes me different than, let's say, other agencies is because I'm an industry insider and I know, I guess, the social listening side of the business and what sort of motivates like the sports nutrition niche market or the snack market that sort of works with it, or the meal prep market that works with it. The data approach is what I would say a lot more strategic and more sniper like. So I probably spend about half my day reviewing that data, or building the frameworks for new clients, truthfully. And yeah, that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, honestly. And then, having meetings with the brands I work with, mostly at the C level or VP level. I do get down and dirty with some of the staff if it's training them, truthfully. And then, that's a lot of my time. That's a lot of my day. And then, everyone comes home. We have some family time. I go to jujitsu. I'm very fortunate. I train, with the Gracie family, and
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's badass that you get to train with the Gracies. That's I mean, like, that's for the people that have no idea about martial arts in general. That's upper echelon right there.
I get to train under Henzo and Hollis Gracie. It's like, if you know anything about jujitsu or the UFC, that's kind of like royalty.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, I will say this, like, people ask, like, Dan, how do you have time to do everything you do? I think the big thing is I don't get caught up in the scroll on social media. I think the other thing is because I'm a data guy and I understand, how manipulative social media can be, I actually try to stay off of it. I do post, I do have a presence, but I also understand how the algorithms draw you in.
Oh,
Okay. So I don't waste time there. Okay. I don't waste time watching TV. It's not to say if you watch TV, you're wasting time. It's just, I prefer, spending free time, either with my family or reading up on new ingredients or looking at like some of my data scrapes and seeing, what's come about to see if there's any, new potential ingredients or new applications of old ingredients that have, never really been used, so there's a lot of that out there.
Fascinating. All right. I'll get you out of here on this, Dan. What does your daily supplement regimen consist of? If it varies a little bit from day to day, but we can like high level, what's a typical day in the life?
Typical day in the life. When I train in the morning, truthfully, it is, it depends. Okay. Like full disclosure, even though flavor matters, flavor to me doesn't matter. So a lot of times I'll have coffee, I'll throw egg white protein into it, and I'll either throw in on an alpha brain, which makes no sense from a flavor perspective, or Ghost's nootropic powder that Christian Guzman, I even forget what it's called actually.
The gamer one? Are you talking about Ghost Gamer, or is it?
No, the one that comes in the black bottle.
Oh yeah.
I don't even know what it's called. I just whenever they have a sale, I buy a lot of it. I really like the acetyl L-carnitine, so that's why I use it.
Same here.
So that's what I'll take in the morning, like pre-training. I'll come home, and when I have breakfast, I'll have ubiquinol. I'll have some supplemental copper, which will make sense to like discuss it on my nighttime stuff. I'll have a probiotic, and then I'll also have a Pre4 Pro prebiotic. And then, throughout the day, I may have, I'm doing so much what I would say trying things that it could be random energy drinks, random whatever. Okay. Yeah. A lot of random proteins, truthfully, just because always trying new things. And then pre-bed, I actually do like ZMA, not because I think it boosts testosterone. I think it just has a great whack of magnesium, which if you're an active athlete, you should be getting double the RDA. So you get a solid dose of magnesium and obviously a solid dose of zinc. And that's why I take copper in the morning, because too much zinc will leach it. I'll also have fish oil, and I'm trying to think what else. NAC. So I probably have a decade's worth of NAC as well.
Yeah, how much do you take a day? Because I've got tubs of it, and I take between 600 to 1,200 a day, just depending on if I'm doing a scoop or it's another pre-workout.
Yeah, I'll take 1,200.
1,200. Yeah, it's good stuff. Got to keep that liver functioning.
Now on what I would say strength training days where I'm doing strength training, let's say in the middle of the day, I'll have a pre-workout. I don't like things that are overly stimmed. But I also can't say what I use because it'll piss a lot of people off. Let's just say this. It does have, it is dosed well. It does have backing research. And truthfully, sometimes I'll throw in additional acetyl L-carnitine or on an alpha brain on top of it.
Excellent. Awesome, Dan. Well, I've kept you a little over an hour. I hope that wasn't too long, but I truly, truly enjoyed this conversation. It was a long time coming. And based on what we said, it seems like we need to have at least another episode or two.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to do this again because you are a wealth of knowledge. And maybe we can get a third party on here to can have some healthy debate on a couple of subjects at a future thing too.
I welcome it.
Awesome. Anything else you want to shamelessly plug or discuss before we put a
bonus? No, I'm good, man. I don't need to plug anything. I think just for all of you out there, hopefully I can open your minds a little bit, to as an actual industry insider that's actually actively involved in a number of brands, in sports nutrition, but also just in what I would say big food and the big supplement world. So there's levels to the game, and I think I'm at the top.
Outstanding. Awesome, Dan. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Robert.